It's all over. Prigozhin has reached a deal with Putin, and this was mediated by Lukashenko, so the Belarusian president. And, you know, I'm going to give you a brief recap before I go into detail about what happened, because some of you might be, you know, just arriving on the scene and you have no clue what the hell's happening. A coup? What coup? Well, a coup in quotation marks, right? So this is the video that I did for you guys yesterday, the stream. It's almost got 1 million views on Twitter. Okay, so if you want to go watch the full thing, it's on Twitter, and it's also right here, of course, on the YouTube channel. Essentially, you have a man, this guy here, called Prigozhin. Mr. Prigozhin is a very rich businessman, right? He comes from catering, and he decided to raise a private army, which is called Wagner. And, you know, it's basically, I mean, some people call it mercenary group. No, not really. And I've of course, I've spoken about that at length and so on in this video. But he raised a private army, and they fought alongside the Russian armed forces in Bakhmut, right? In Ukraine. I mentioned Bakhmut, though, because that's the longest battle thus far in the entire Ukraine war. This is, of course, counting from 2022. And, you know, after this, despite winning this huge battle, you know, he decides to march on Moscow. And so yesterday, the FSB opened a criminal case against Mr. Prigozhin. They said that he's, you know, inciting armed rebellion. And he was, you know, he was like sending a convoy of his, you know, 25,000 troops. I'm not quite sure the whole 25,000 were there, but he said that he was going to send them to take back control, because he keeps lambasting the defense ministry and says they're incompetent, and he hates Shoigu, the defense minister, and so on and so on. But he crossed the line, right? They've tolerated his rants. He's been posting videos and messages every day. They've tolerated that, but this was a red line. So now everybody was saying, especially in Western media, oh my God, Russia's falling apart. Putin is going to be gone in a second now. You know, like it's so funny because they were saying just yesterday, right? The whole time, Wagner are terrorists. Wagner are mercenaries. All they care about is money. And now, you know, they're moderate rebels, like in Syria. They're freedom fighters, right? Funny how that works. Let's get into it, okay? So, the gist of it is that you know, a convoy arrived in Rostov. Now, if you can just see on the map here, it's quite the ways from Moscow, okay? So if you look at the distance here, it says 1,200 kilometers, okay? So it's quite the drive, but you can get there fast enough if you're determined. And, you know, they basically stopped in this town, and I'm going to show you all of these, but I think it's important that we listen to Putin, because Putin actually responded. You know, you have to understand that in this wild 24 hours, Zelensky had said nothing and Putin had said nothing until now. Let me play you their speeches, and then we'll continue. Here's an excerpt of Putin's speech.
Свободу граждан. Тот, кто организовал и готовил военный мятеж, кто поднял оружие на боевых товарищей, предали Россию и ответят за это. А тех, кого пытаются втянуть в это преступление, призываю не совершать роковую и трагическую, неповторимую ошибку. Сделать единственно правильный выбор. Прекратить участие в преступных действиях. Верю, что мы сбережем и отстоим то, что дорого и свято для нас. И вместе с нашей Родиной мы одолеем любые испытания, станем еще сильнее.
I mean, let me put it this way. You know you screwed up when Putin goes and makes a speech about you. He didn't mention Prigozhin by name, but, you know, it's very clear who he's referring to. Okay? You know you screwed up. So, here's Zelensky.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Бажаю здоров'я всі люди світу. Сьогодні день, коли точно не має бути тиші. І точно потрібне лідерство. Сьогодні світ побачив, що господарі Росії нічого не контролюють. Взагалі нічого. Просто повний хаос, повна відсутність якоїсь передбачуваності. І це на російській...
I don't understand this. I don't understand this because we've been told by Zelensky and you know, NATO and the EU that actually Russia is ruled by Vladimir Putin, you know, with an iron fist. He has an iron grip on Russia. He is so authoritarian that if you are one of his critics, he will go and poison you in London, right? He will find you wherever you are. That is how much Vladimir Putin controls Russia. And now suddenly, you know, we're doing a 180-degree flip and say, oh, look at this chaos around. Putin's not in control. Putin's an idiot. Very interesting. I appreciate the contradictions and comedy that you're giving us. Here's another part of his speech.
З Росією це реально підтримує. І третє, скажу по-русски. Человек из Кремля, очевидно, очень боится и, наверное, прячется где-то, не показывается. Уверен, что уже не в Москве. Звонит куда-то, выпрашивает там что-то. Он знает, чего боится, потому что он сам создал эту угрозу. Все зло, все потери, вся ненависть. Он это сам распространяет. И чем дольше еще он сможет перебегать между своими бункерами, тем больше потеряет.
Are you reading a novel or something? I feel like this is... What the hell is he talking about, man? Like the guy... They released their speeches almost at the same time, and I'm pretty sure Putin is in Moscow. I know there were people posting, you know, a flight plan or flight route of one of his planes. Sorry, but, you know, I'm pretty sure the Russians, just like the Americans... you're not going to find that plane or be able to track it unless you're, you know, working on the other side. But it's not something you're going to find on Google. I really doubt that. In any case, this whole situation has been defused. So how did it, so what happened in the first place? Well, look, you can see here, this is in Rostov. Okay. So this is Wagner at the Southern Military District headquarters in Rostov. Okay. Now, to be honest, it's just a bunch of tanks. I mean, I've seen more tanks at a military parade than that, right? I mean, if you've, just one example, one of the things, like if you've ever been in Paris on the 14th of July, you know, obviously this is not really the column they made it out to be. You have some people here sitting in a cafe, okay, and people were then coming up, yet civilians coming up and blocking them, talking to the soldiers, playing music, trying to do anything to just kind of cordon them off. Give him a round of applause for his armored personnel carrier accordion. It's not bad. Someone also took graduation pictures. I think it was a marriage also. So, I mean, it was kind of funny, honestly. People trying to make light of the situation. Putin was then speaking with Erdogan, so the Turkish president. He was also speaking with the leaders from Kazakhstan. He spoke to the Iranian. I can't remember if it's the foreign minister or the president. Basically, the Iranian government. Doesn't matter, right? And it's so funny because they're acting like, oh my God, you know, Putin is about to lose control of the whole situation. And to be fair, you know, just for our argument's sake, anything is possible. Anything is possible. But once again, you know, Prigozhin, the power struggle has always been between Prigozhin and Shoigu. Prigozhin has always, you know, erred on the side of caution and, you know, avoided naming Putin or even referring to Putin indirectly. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that this isn't problematic and chaotic, because it certainly is to an extent, but it's exaggerated and blown out of proportion in the Western media because, you know, anything bad that happens to Russians is a great thing. Right? That's the mentality. But I want to show you here, this is Chris Murphy, right, senator. He said that a civil war inside Russia is potentially cataclysmic, and he's right. He's right in that sentence. You know, the thing is that people were cheering this on the internet, thinking like, oh well, this is funny. I mean, the Civil War kind of took place mostly on the internet. Not one bullet was fired. Okay, you know, I'm speaking figuratively, but really, not one shot was fired. Not one person was killed. All right, there were no fields of bodies or something like that. There was no civil war. Could it have spiraled out of control? Yeah, anything's possible, like I said. But you know, we'll get into the more of the of these things in a second. I just wanted to play you the voice note because Prigozhin confirmed what the Belarusian president's press service were saying, right? This is the Belarus embassy in the UK saying that President Lukashenko held talks with the head of Wagner, so Prigozhin, and they continued negotiations throughout the day. Prigozhin accepted the proposal of the president of Belarus to stop the movement of Wagner on the territory of Russia, right? So basically, go back and fight in Ukraine. That's what it is. And I think that is why you had a purported Chechen column of armored vehicles and a convoy of troops paused. And equally in Rostov, you had the Wagner. They were just they were stationed there and they remained in those positions, probably because you had these negotiations going on in the background. Yesterday, what did I tell you guys? And I'm going to repeat this again. We are talking about matters of national security. Okay, this is amidst a war, right? So it's happening during a war, one of the biggest wars, probably hopefully something that will end soon. But all these things, the developments, you don't see the developments. Yeah, you got people that are so certain of this and that, and you have to be, you have to take everything with a pinch of salt because these things happen in the shadows. All right, there are negotiations happening that you don't even know about, you never even hear about. There are things being done, people moving, people speaking, messages being conveyed behind the scenes that you'll never even know about. Okay, there's a lot happening. The majority of things concerning something like this, a scenario like this, you will never see them in public. You will never find out about them. But here's what we do have, and I'm going to show you. This is a voice message that Prigozhin sent on his Telegram channel to kind of, show that, yeah, I'm leaving and it's real, and let me play it for you.
Мы вышли 23 июня на марш справедливости. За сутки мы прошли, не доходя 200 километров до Москвы. За это время мы не пролили ни одной капли крови наших бойцов. Сейчас наступил тот момент, когда кровь может пролиться. Поэтому, понимая всю ответственность за то, что будет пролита русская кровь с одной из сторон, мы разворачиваем свои колонны и уходим в обратном направлении в полевые лагеря согласно плану.
The Kremlin, they have dropped the charges against Prigozhin. Okay, so here you can see this is from Sky News. They say the Kremlin in a statement said all criminal charges against Prigozhin will be dropped and none of the Wagner group fighters will be prosecuted. I suppose this might be the extent, like that's as far as Putin and the Kremlin are going to go, because again, this is not about Putin and he's like some kind of some king who decides everything. You have to understand that Russia, it has a constitution, it has a military, it has its armed forces, which have fought bravely and crushed the Nazis in World War II. You can't. There comes a point where Wagner has to be merged with the Russian army because Prigozhin won in Bakhmut and he did very well, but he can't just be running around. This is exactly why you have to integrate the forces and have order. That's the nature of the military, and especially you're at war. This is wartime. Russia is not, this is not a utopia where NATO doesn't exist, and Russia isn't surrounded by a handful of NATO countries. Russia is at war. Russia is being threatened. And I know Prigozhin yesterday, he did this video 30 minutes long and he said, Putin lied about the reasons for the war. Putin this and that. I don't really care about those because he's not citing the right reasons. he is saying things like, "Oh, Ukraine and NATO were gonna plan some attack," and there was a giant, threat that was looming over Russia, and on February 24th, 2022. Dude, that threat has been looming for a long time. Once again, I always say this: if we were in the Cold War, maybe we can have a different discussion about what NATO is and what it should be doing. But we are not. The Soviet Union doesn't exist. And NATO expanding and encircling Russia is a threat. And of course, he never mentions that because, that is one of the main reasons for this chaos, this cataclysm that has been unleashed. And it's really just a continuation of 2014 with Maidan coup, color revolution before that. I mean, I'm talking about 2009. And then, of course, this goes back 100 years. We've been screwing with the Russians. And the UK invaded Russia. The US invaded Russia. There are many threats that Russia's faced, and he just acts like it's something with, it's a bunch of rich people and Shoigu wants a medal. Who the hell's talking about Shoigu? It's only you, man. I know you don't like the guy, but maybe he's incompetent. Maybe all of the things you say are true. But I really doubt that Russia, went into Ukraine because of Shoigu wanting a medal. What is this garbage? In any case, good thing it's over and they sorted this out. Hopefully the whole goddamn war comes to an end because guess what? It's bad for the. I mean. It's not only bad for people in Ukraine and Russia. It's if you have something like this on top of it, and I don't think it was as exaggerated, this situation, as much as they say in the Western media, because they want it to spiral out of control, but it's not good. Even Chris Murphy, who's a U.S. senator, is saying that a civil war in Russia is cataclysmic. Okay, now I don't think Prigozhin is exactly civil war material, but you never know. You never know. This is from Dmitry Peskov, who's the Kremlin spokesperson, and this is the situation. Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, will move to Belarus. Shoigu is not going to be removed from his post as defense minister, which is what Prigozhin had wanted. The Wagner soldiers or fighters who did not take part in this uprising, outburst, whatever you want to call it, they will be offered contracts by the defense ministry. I mean, excuse me. They weren't offered contracts now. These contracts were pending for quite, a couple of weeks now, for quite some time. So I'm not quite sure this is accurate reporting here by the Washington Post. The contracts are at the heart of this issue from the beginning. But okay, my point here is I want to tell you that Prigozhin is going to move to Belarus. I think another way of saying this is he's being exiled. And he should probably be happy that it's not worse. That it's not something else. There are far worse things in the world. And what's wrong with Belarus, after all? I hear it's very beautiful, but never been there. So the other thing is that the charges have been dropped, which I mentioned earlier. The FSB opened a criminal case against Prigozhin, but that's gone. And no Wagner fighters or troops will be prosecuted either. So this is the settlement, or this is what we know of the settlement that was mediated by Lukashenko, by Belarus president, to defuse the tension, the situation, the outburst between Putin and Prigozhin, or rather the Prigozhin's outburst. I say outburst as an understatement and with British sarcasm, because it's so Prigozhin-like to do something wild like this. And he really crossed the line this time. I mean, there's a difference. This is not posting videos where yelling at the defense minister, send me ammo. This is really something else. Let me show you some of these videos that they're purported to be from Rostov. And you can see this sense of brotherhood, of fraternity, where people are hugging the Wagner soldiers, because at the end of the day, they're Russians, right? They're fighting alongside the Russian army. So they are literally brothers, and here's some of the footage. So they're celebrating the peace deal. right? Essentially. I saw some other videos of them. I saw some other videos of them handing out food and so on, and I mean, you know, it's good to see something defused with a little bit of diplomacy, and I enjoyed this very much. Professor Marandi, he landed in Moscow, and he says he was quoting this CNN article that says Putin is at risk of losing his iron grip on power. The next 24 hours are critical. I mean, I'm sorry, this is a bit of an exaggeration. We are, you know, we're talking about Prigozhin, not Napoleon or Attila the Hun, you know. They're so disappointed. They are so disappointed in the NATO camp that this did not spiral out of control. Let me show you on CNN how they're crying about this. Oh no, the tragedy. They worked it out with diplomacy. Putin and Prigozhin and Lukashenko solved everything. Oh no, the disaster.
Do we think now the Prigozhin threat is over?
No, I think it would be premature to suggest that. And indeed, he says the only reason he's turning around his columns on the way to Moscow, having, he says, got 200 kilometers within the city outskirts, is to stop bloodshed. He doesn't make a reference to a negotiation with the president of Belarus. That's done by the Belarusian president's own staff, suggesting that, in fact, Lukashenko intervened after speaking to Putin, and some sort of deal appears to have been hatched. But I don't think we know the entirety of it. It may be that there are going to be significant changes at the head of Russia's Ministry of Defense, but even if the ultimate targets of Prigozhin's march on Moscow end up being removed from their jobs, and that's the Defense Minister Shoigu, the head of the Ukrainian campaign, Gerasimov, and Chief of Staff, still, he's really crossed the Rubicon here, frankly, taking control of Rostov, moving through Voronezh, blockades put into Lipetsk, and putting that kind of military pressure on Putin, causing Putin to make that very stern speech today. It's quite clear that, to me, it will be hard to suddenly put the clock back and have Prigozhin a valued member of the Russian military establishment. So I think there are more details to come from this. I'm sure there are some who will say it's smart of Prigozhin not to send a relatively small column of Wagner forces into the massive million-strong metropolis of Moscow, where they're bound to, frankly, get lost amongst police forces trying to control such a vast area. But it is fair to look at the last 24 hours as a time which has significantly weakened Vladimir Putin, and I don't think we fully know the entirety of how that's played out.
Significantly weakened. I mean, I'm sorry, man. Maybe we have different definitions of weak, but if you're able to negotiate, or shall we say, resolve and defuse situations without using bombs, violence, that is actually strength, because it's more difficult, right? So, in case this wasn't obvious, the Russian Air Force could have obliterated Wagner in its entirety. And that was the claim. Remember, a few days ago, that was the claim that, oh, the Russians had struck Wagner with missiles, which I find hard to believe, because I showed you the video last night. There's nothing there. There's literally no evidence of that. So, I don't know why the hell they were saying this, but 25,000, let's say even 35,000 versus what we're talking hundreds of thousands of Russian troops. You're telling me that Putin was weakened by a column of 5 tanks in a town square? Jesus Christ! Like they try to twist it into something so you don't understand. This is not about the size of this column that was in Rostov. This is about the principle that, Prigozhin is supposed to do his job. It is not up to him to start questioning, the defense ministry. I mean, maybe in private, that's another matter. And they even let him do it in public for months and months and months. You know, he was he was attacking Shoigu and saying, "Oh, the top brass are incompetent. You're not supporting us enough in the war, etc., etc." They let him do it, right? But he crossed the line here. You know, it's not up to him to start directing columns towards the capital. You know, it's so Prigozhin, but you know, he really stepped out of line, and that is the principle that that is at stake here. Let me just pull something out for you here.
Вы умеете прощать?
Да. Но не все.
А что невозможно простить?
Предательство.
I think there are a lot of stronger words to describe what Prigozhin did. A lot of Russians are angry. Not they're not calling for heads to roll, but many people look at this as mutiny. You know, mutiny is when you don't obey your commanding officer, when you start trying to turn against the leadership. You know, you usually, not always, but usually it refers to a ship. But mutiny can occur, you know, here as well. The thing is that Prigozhin is not an officer. He's not even a non-commissioned officer, an NCO. He's not in the Russian military. So he has this very gray area kind of standing. And the thing is that, you know, he was going to be out of a job, basically, because Putin was saying, I want your troops, Wagner, every single one to sign a contract that they'll be integrated into the Russian military, meaning Prigozhin has no job, really. Wagner will be dissolved, so to speak. The soldiers that are in Wagner would be inside the Russian military, period. So maybe that's the reason for this outburst. Shall we put it diplomatically and call it an outburst? The other thing is that maybe Bakhmut went to his head, because how many men did they lose there, the Russians? 10,000, 15,000, right? I think it's slightly more. The point is here, these are droves and droves of men. And, you know, it's on top of that, on top of the human cost, the losses, this is the longest battle in the war. And he won it, not the Russian military, even though they're fighting alongside each other. Yes, and they're all Russian. You get it? But he won it. And what was his quote-unquote reward? Oh, well, goodbye. We don't need you anymore, because we're gonna have all the troops sign these contracts, and that's it. Maybe that's what went. You know, maybe he was like, okay, screw this. Well, you don't want me anymore. I might as well just send a column of my boys to Moscow. I don't know. This is the thing, because you have a lot of theories floating around. Just before I continue, look at this. This is from the Atlantic. They're saying Russia slides into civil war. Is Putin facing his Tsar Nicholas II moment? By Anne Applebaum, of course. Jesus Christ. Talk about a propagandist. I mean, she has her head stuck up her, you know. These people are nuts. They're nuts. They exaggerate things like beyond belief. So let's look at some of the you know, let's try and analyze the situation, because one thing that people that some people suspect is that this was a psyop, right? A psychological operation, right? What is the objective and nature of a psyop? It's to confuse the enemy. You're doing counterintelligence. You're trying to confuse the enemy. You're trying to distract the enemy, right? You're trying to make the enemy waste resources. Can you just picture for a moment, in the Ukrainian military and in NATO, how many people they had running around the clock trying to figure out what the hell's going on? Is this for real? You know, is Prigozhin actually going to take on Putin? How many troops does Prigozhin have? Who is close to him? Who might betray him? Who is working for him secretly? You know, what is Shoigu's standing? Maybe we should approach Prigozhin and give him money and weapons. Maybe we can use him against the Kremlin. How can we approach him? Maybe we can use this officer posing as someone, you know, a million things. Do you know how many resources you've wasted now over, you know, what is, again, let's call it an outburst, to put it mildly, right? Others say mutiny. I mean, they opened a criminal case against him. But we are just hypothesizing here. Remember, we're just speculating. Just think how much resources and how much time you would waste for the enemy with something like this. And remember, the Russians are still, they're still pounding Ukrainian / NATO positions, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw they wiped out 2 airfields today, right, among other targets. So this is very good if you want to distract not only on the battlefield. You want to trick, for example, Ukrainians into pouring resources, or NATO into pouring resources into some place where you give the impression you're weak, right? Like, but on top of that, for the PR and media psyop, right? So I'm talking about propaganda value online, in print, in media, etc., etc. If you want something bad, you want to distract and take away attention from that, you might do something like this, or the opposite. You got an operation going, as I mentioned before, with these airfields, and you don't want them to think that you're in a strong position. You want the Ukraine and NATO to think that you're weak, when in fact you are very strong and you're going after their targets. These are just different theories and ideas of why this might have happened. The fact that the Belarusian president is intervening, not intervening, but mediating, right? He's trying to get both sides to calm down, defuse, and make peace, shake hands, etc. Doesn't matter. I mean, he could also be playing along. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this happened 100%, because nobody knows what is going on for 100% now in Ukraine, and Ukraine and Russia, right? Because this is all part of the Ukraine war. Nobody knows. Like I told you, most of these things are happening in the shadows. Most of these things you will never, ever see or know about. That's the truth. This is the name of the game, right? It's all secret. So one thing I wanted to add as well is that I think this is a strong suit of the Russians, right? Because another person in Putin's position might have sent his air force to flatten whatever column or person was threatening to march on Moscow. Even if you remember, Prigozhin always directed his anger at Shoigu and the generals. He never attacked Putin, and there was never he never crossed any line with Putin until now, right? But the fact that, if we're taking this at face value, that everything was fixed with a deal, then that's great. Look at how you can fix situations by mediating, right? Look at that as an example. Forget now, about the Ukraine war for a second. Just look at the element. Look at the principle here that I'm trying to convey. That you can fix things with diplomacy, with mediating, similarly to the Chinese with Iran and Saudi Arabia not too long ago. Although that was much bigger and a different kind of issue. I posted this on Twitter. I said I'm standing by for CNN and company to upgrade Wagner from ruthless thugs to freedom fighters. Man, they were already starting to do it, They were already starting to do it because whoever attacks Putin for them is their friend, right? So I want to address something that this guy was saying here in the video that I showed you, where they're talking about Shoigu stepping down, right? So these are just rumors for now, okay? I'm broadcasting right now. This is 11 p.m. Paris time, okay? So in Moscow, I think it might be 2 hours later. It's 1 a.m. It's a weekend. I mean, no, these people don't sleep though. But my point here is that these are just rumors for now, okay? It's June 24th, 11 p.m. Paris time. As of this moment, there is no confirmation that Defense Minister Shoigu is going to step down. I would, if that's what Prigozhin got after this outburst, remember, I say outburst, I'm being very generous and diplomatic. Wow. Because, I mean, who's going to replace Shoigu? Prigozhin? No. The Russian military would never stand for that. They would never stand for that. This guy is not he's not from the military. I'm not saying that, he wasn't in the battlefield in Bakhmut and so on. Yeah, he has his own military. No one's debating or talking about that. But he doesn't have the rank to be defense minister. I know in some countries, they put civilians as defense ministers, which is a bit funny and weird. But I don't think that Putin is going to allow that to happen. And I'm purely speculating, right? And the reason is that anybody with an armored column is going to think they can get their way by threatening to march on Moscow, right? Now, again, these are just rumors, right? I don't see any of that being confirmed now. Nothing at all. These are only rumors. The other thing that we have to consider, we have to talk about, is the criminal case. Remember, the FSB, they opened a criminal case, an indictment against Prigozhin. So what's going to happen to that? Are they going to get rid of it? Are they going to close it? Is that part of the so-called deal? We don't know. And like I said, I think there are things that we will never find out about, or find out about in a very, very long time. I know this is a completely different, the example I want to give you is a completely different animal, but just the analogy here. You guys remember Cuban Missile Crisis? Everybody thought like, oh, well, the Russians are putting their missiles there and now removing them, and that's it. No. The Russians agreed to remove the missiles because the Americans said they'd remove theirs. The only thing is that they kept it secret. They didn't, we know about it now, but they didn't want to tell anybody because they didn't want to give the appearance of, of appeasing the Russians and so on, right? That's the analogy I'm trying to convey here. So there might be things in this so-called agreement between Shoigu and Lukashenko and Putin that we don't know about. But I don't want to exaggerate it and make it into some kind of giant thing. You have to understand here that this is good for Russia. The situation is calm, or calmer, shall we say calmer. That doesn't mean that it's 100% okay. What do you guys think is going to happen to Prigozhin? Because is this guy still going to have a career after this? I think that Putin is going to want to integrate Wagner troops more than ever, especially after this. Because at any moment you're going to have Prigozhin with some tanks. Now, keep in mind, we are in this scenario. We are just taking the situation at face value and assuming everything is true, right? But again, take everything with a pinch of salt, please. So my point here is just that will Prigozhin have a career? I really don't know. I really don't know after this. That remains to be seen, and of course I will keep you guys up to date. But that's really it for now. Thank God cooler heads have prevailed, and a lot of things will be revealed as time goes on. And of course I'll always keep you up to date on the Ukraine war and international relations right here.